to me, 4 words killed capitalism in America, and they were uttered by George Bush's U.S. Treasury Secretary, Henry Paulson. Too big to fail.
That's right.
And everything that George was talking about, with all the with the co-opting between business and government, it's called fascism. In other words, that's the merger of state and corporate powers, and I believe that's what we're seeing.
And talking about powers, you three, 2016 is not that far away. My front runners with my predictors tell me so far it looks like it's going to be Hillary on the Democratic side, and Jeb Bush probably will get it on the Republican side. Let's go through each one of you. Catherine, you first. Do you have any picks of those two or any additional ones?
I think what you're being told is right, because if you look at what happened with the Supreme Court decision on contributions, essentially the last restrictions coming off,
yep.
What I'm seeing, George, is a real fear of what could happen, if we had real free elections with campaign financing restrictions. And I think you're seeing the corporations look at what's going on and saying, wait a minute, we don't want a food fight here. We don't want a mess. We're scared of how angry people are. What we're going to do is clear out the competition. We've seen Christie, Cuomo, other competitors, clearly under pressure of being knocked off. And I think sort of the overt side of the corporations are saying, we want something clean and we want to make sure we get somebody who's acceptable to us. And I think, if you look at the economic warfare and tensions going on both domestically and in the world, I think people are getting scared.
I think so,
So
George.
there's a real effort top-down to kind of engineer this and make this flick.
George Ure, you see anybody else other than those two?
I think Ted Cruz has at least an equal shot with Jeb Bush. I think that the Bush family, there are a lot of us who are Tea Partyists who look at, I won't say Tea Partyist, I'll say really, really independent voters who are willing to look at records, performance, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are going to look at the Bush family and say, look, Dad ran the CIA, Dad was president, then along came George the second, and he got to be president. Enough. We don't need the aristocracy.
We don't want to. Yeah, we don't want this dynasty here.
Yeah, exactly. And so you've got guys like Ted Cruz coming out today with 76 lies of the Obama administration. So he's starting to hit back, saying, what happened to due process for Americans being killed by drones overseas? That is that really constitutionally what we're about? That's an interesting debate. I hope it makes it into the political arena, but so far it doesn't look like it. So I think Cruz, he's got a lot of minority appeal, very strong in Texas. I think he's got some potential. Rand Paul, maybe as a vice president for Cruz.
What do you think, Gerald?
Well, we did a piece in the New Trends Journal. We call it the Presidential Reality Show. And after going through the whole list, here was our trend forecast. In the absence of new entrants from the established parties, a viable third-party challenger, and/or a major wild card event, we forecast a Hillary Clinton versus Rand Paul race in 2016. And if the election were to be held today, considering Rand Paul's hardline anti-abortion stand and vacillating positions on same-sex marriage, we predicted Hillary Clinton would squeak out a victory. Place your bets. Whoever wins, you lose. I want to. I'm a political atheist. I won't vote for any of the Bloods or the Crips. I look at both parties as murderers and thieves. They start wars and kill people and rob our dough. So what we write has nothing to do with who we want.
Understand.
Now, when we wrote that was before the movement going back to Jeb Bush. And here's what happened. All of a sudden, on one day, we started seeing George W. Bush's paintings make the front page of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Financial Times. So what they're doing is they're cleaning up the littered legacy of George W. Bush. And I believe, exactly as you had begun this conversation with, I believe at this point it's going to be Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton.
That's right. And it's going to be an interesting race and take. And then the bottom line is, what do we get? 4 more years of everything else?
Exactly. It's more of the same. You know, and there is absolutely no difference to me. You know, there's just, tangential differences, how they dress and how they present themselves. But it'll be more of the same, but worse.
Yeah. One of my favorite movies, the movie Network. You all remember that with Peter Finch, the late Peter Finch, playing Neil, Howard Beale. And one of his statements, here he is in his trench coat on camera, looking like Columbo, saying, all we want as Americans is to be left alone. Give us our telly and our toaster and our radial tires and leave us alone. And I think George and Catherine and Gerald, Americans simply want to be left alone. They want to have their nice little house, their 1 or 2 cars, their family intact, their job where they have some income. They want to go to their sporting events and go to their favorite restaurants. And that's what they want. I'm going
to be, George, I'm going to be the tough guy.
All right.
Okay, because you all know my red button story. I'll tell it again just to make sure we all know. In 2000, I asked a group of 100 Americans who would push a red button if it would stop all hard narcotics trafficking in their community. And out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, 99 said they would not push the button because that drug money is, and the people who control that money essentially are financing the government deficit. If they move their money out of the stock market, their mutual funds would go down. So the reality is whoever we elect as president is going to have to the American people want that person to not push the red button. And we know for many decades now the American people have been the beneficiary of the global game that the government is playing with the debasement of the dollar and with using the U.S. military to force natural resources to be exchanged to us for cheap. So
I agree with that.
The American people have always supported this game. Where's the popular support to run the model clean?
So you don't think they want that just leave me alone attitude and let me do my thing?
When 99% of an audience tells me that they would not push the red button, they would continue to allow drugs to be marketed to kids in their area so as not to collapse the economy, what it tells me is, the complicity is much broader and deeper, is my experience.
George,
go ahead, George.
What people want is the check.
Yeah. I think there's something deeper. I think that America, and it astounds me, every morning I get up, I look for the headline that someone is finally going to be a leader in this country. Instead, everybody is basically bought by somebody else's checkbook, and it's a big circle, you know what. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for somebody in any political party who can articulate a new American dream. The last great American dream we had was we're going to put a man on the moon. We haven't done jack.
We don't have a dream right now.
We don't have a dream. That's right. And if you look at that core psychological lack, it's why my kids are millennials, and they look at the future and they go, this sucks. Why should I buy a house? Why should I work my butt off and get degrees? Why should I be excellent? It's all going to blow up because the money's falling apart. There's no jobs. Robots are going to take 50% of the workforce in the next 20 years. Nobody in politics is talking about that. We don't have any transition plan to a 20-hour work week because people in politics are too stupid to articulate a worthwhile dream.
Much more to come with the big three, Gerald, Catherine, and George on Coast to Coast AM. Well, next hour with our roundtable panelists, we'll take your phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. When we come back, much more to talk about on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you with Gerald Celente, Catherine Austin Fitz, George Ure. At least three of us, of the four, remember the John F. Kennedy assassination back in '63. Catherine, I don't know. I think you were a little too young for that.
Oh, no, I remember.
You do? Okay.
I remember very well. I remember exactly where I was. major discussions going on in our household about what was up.
From that moment, we lost something in this country that we have never, ever been able to replace. Gerald Celente, will we ever get trust and faith back in government?
Yeah, I would say it can, but not under the current system. I mean, to me, as I said, the Republicans and Democrats, they're two political mafias. But I believe that I agree, by the way, with what you said about the movie network, and there is a change going on. You look at the polls that are coming up recently about how many people no longer want foreign involvement. And you saw that with Syria, by the way, when President Obama and John Kerry were pushing for action against Syria, and the people didn't want it. And then you look at the polls that come out continually. Back in January, there was a poll that only 2% said Congress was doing an excellent job, 6% said good, and 24% said fair, and 66% said poor. So I think that people just want to live their lives. They really want to be left alone. We have a legacy of failure as far as foreign entanglements. So I really believe that, in talking about Kennedy, one of the stories, one of the ways I made my name in trend forecasting, and it was when I came out with my book, Trend Tracking, back in the late 1980s. And in that book, I had forecast, it came out in 1989, that there'd be a new third party because the people were so disgusted with what was going on with the administration, and then following, of course, on the heels of the 1987 stock market crash.
Mm-hmm.
And I predicted a new third party. If for some reason I mentioned Ross Perot's name, and I really believe that those conditions exist today. If we had someone of credibility and that was really looking, I was going, actually tonight, just by accident, I was looking for something, and I came across an old notebook. And I'm going through it, and I had some notes about Perot. And you know what Perot kept doing? He kept talking about what's good for the people. What's good for the people. And if we had somebody doing those kind of things and really putting things in the context of how can we rebuild America, I think you could see a strong third-party movement, and I really believe the people want what's best for this country.
Could it be a Jesse Ventura?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I think it needs to be somebody, not in the entertainment field, not somebody that's been there before, someone that's fresh and clean, has no ties to any special interest, and is really there for the people. I think the time is right for it.
I would have liked Lee Iacocca at that time.
He would have been one, but again, he would be too allied with business in so many ways.
Yeah.
And remember, don't forget the Chrysler bailout. So I think you need somebody totally removed.
But remember, he paid him off early.
I know, but it's still a bailout. And if you or I go bust, we don't get bailed
Nobody's
out. A lot of people resent those things.
Except that maybe you and I can call each other, Gerald, and help each other.
That's right.
Well, here's what you need. I agree with Gerald. I think there's a real opportunity, and with George, to put forward a new American dream. The reality is, to do that, you're going to have a pretty radical re-engineering of how the federal government money works. And so you're talking about something that's going to, it's going to have to inspire change and real movement locally in 3,100 counties. It can be done. If you look at, George, the waste in the economy, particularly the government money,
yeah,
there is enough money to kind of jump the curve on the situation despite everything we've been talking about. So it can be done, but you're talking about incredible leadership, and you're talking about a willingness of many, many people to change in very significant ways.
The speed bump, I think, George, that will keep a third party from happening is that the existing duopoly is owned by corporate masters and by super PACs, the political action committees. And take congressional races just as one small example. In many congressional races, the majority of the money is not coming from within the district, from the people who actually live.
It comes from outside of it.
It's outside, right? It's those little funds in Florida and places like Greenwich, Connecticut, and cities, in Kansas where various big people with deep pockets are. And so what ends up happening is until we are willing to radically change the laws on campaign finance to prohibit the interstate transfer of funds for any elective purpose other than campaigning for the presidency, we ain't going to have change. Sorry to break it to you.
Well, I believe that the vacuum is so large right now. I mean, the conversation among the four of us, we came up with Jeb Bush, Hillary Clinton, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul. I think that was it. That's it.
With Hillary and Jeb being the front runners.
Right. And the people are tired of this. They really want something fresh. And I believe that, and yes, as Catherine said, you need somebody that would really be inspirational. And yes, it would be difficult. But we all know that everything that we do that it is great is of difficulty. It takes a lot of work to be a great musician or a great anything. And it takes practice and dedication. I think the time has never been better in my lifetime than for a new third-party movement. And here's where, by the way, the social media plays a role, where it can happen and have an effect.
The challenge is that with the Supreme Court taking any restrictions off of finance campaigning, a third party is just going to advantage one of the two major candidates.
Right.
As a practical matter. The other thing I have to say is, you don't need the president to lead the charge. I mean, the president of the United States is much more a titular title, we know, than a real title. So if you look at a very broad-based movement in the population, challenging Congress to do it could be enough to make it happen. Because if you look right now at the federal spending, at the, whether it's the Constitution, the laws, or the regulation, the federal government's budget and credit and contracting is run significantly outside of the law. And so, it doesn't have to be led by the president to shift this back under the law. In theory, 3,100 counties could have judges put the tax money in escrow because, if you look at the law, we have an obligation as citizens to make sure that money is spent legally. So, we have many avenues locally and at the congressional level. We don't need the president. We don't need the White House to do it.
And yet, Catherine, isn't it true in your opinion as well as mine that right now people who make it into Congress, the fools on the hill as I call them, are only getting there because of out-of-district money?
Not completely. I mean, every month I send money to Marcy Kaptur.
Okay.
So I think it's very important not to use the word everyone and all on extremes.
Okay.
There are a lot of being a congressman is a very brutal and hard job to do.
Yes. And
we want good people to do these jobs. Now, here's the reality. If you're a person in Congress, you have to please a variety of different constituencies. First and foremost, a group of people that if you don't do what they say, they're going to have you killed. They're going to have your kids killed. And you can't operate with impunity. I was an honest government official, and then I was an honest, my company supported honest government officials, and I got targeted. If you've ever seen the movie Enemy of the State, I played Will Smith in real life. And what I know is if you don't have a control file, they'll invent one for you, and it takes 11 years and $6 million to prove you're clean. So we're operating in an environment where a congressman, has their hands tied in a lot of different ways, including the fact, and this gets back to why I brought up the red button problem, is that their constituents, want more checks, want more money, want more goodies.
Yeah, they do.
And so we need a process in government where we can sit down and say, okay, how do we re-optimize resources instead of pleasing everybody, large and small, just to get their check this this week or this month. And that's why I come back to transparency. If we could require, and we don't need government to do this for us, if we could look at financial statements and government budgets for our county and our congressional district, we could start to see the manifold opportunities to re-engineer. I can't tell you how many counties in this country we are spending $250,000 per unit on HUD housing when $50,000 or $100,000 would buy and rehab a foreclosed property, or we are spending $100 to $150 paying a corporate contractor to do something that we could teleport into that community where $25 plus health care, would create full employment. So there are hundreds of millions of reengineering opportunities in every one of the counties, but it starts with the local Chamber of Commerce and the local Rotary poring over the budget and the financials for that place and saying, okay, let's talk about how we can make money getting the government money back inside of the law.
George Ure, you have talked about an attack on cash. What does that mean?